Welcome to the Insights to Communicate podcast with Adam Probalski, where market and opinion research come together with public affairs and PR.
All right, welcome to the show, Anthony Morse. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to kind of let you tell us about your background, but Anthony is a political consultant, does public policy work, public affairs. I think he probably looks younger than he is, maybe. He definitely has a lot of experience, though. And Anthony, why don't you tell us about your career trajectory, your path, how you got to where you are today?
Excellent. Thank you. And Adam, thank you for having me today. Really appreciate it. Turning 40 in May. Thank you for telling me how it makes me feel great. I actually started my public policy career, I think, very early, for someone of my age. I was living in my small town in central Massachusetts, town of Harvard, and my sister came to me one day and she said, I have a friend who works for Congressman Meehan. She wants to know if you're doing anything this summer, if you'd like to come help us out up in Lowell. And I said, sure, why not? No one else is doing it, so I might as well do it. And that definitely started me on my this career path of politics and policy. When I was young, I had noticed that, while other people sort of dream of like owning their own business or they're gonna start their own business, they're gonna do these grand things in law. I was like, I'm kind of attracted to this political field. I like sort of the cross connection of society and elections and how does it all come together and all that. So that's how I started. And then I went to Northeastern University in Boston. Fun fact for you sports fans, the Huntington Avenue grounds used to be where Northeastern is, and that's where the Red Sox played. So there's so a lot of history there before they moved to Fenway. So I went to Northeastern. I did my internships. I went down to Washington, D.C. I was an intern for Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, in 2005. That was an amazing experience. It was during Hurricane Katrina. It was during the Roberts hearings for the Supreme Court. So you get to learn very quickly while you're down there. And again, got all this knowledge, really started to like it. But I wanted to give a shout out to Governor Mike Dukakis, who was teaching at Northeastern, who really sort of sets the love of policy for a lot of students, where he comes in and it's a simple premise for the class. What is an issue that is affecting your community, and how will you go about fixing it within the public policy framework? And, we talk about government relations in terms of, hey, you have to have a relationship with the state house and the state senate, even the people, the mayors, the businesses, all that, and you come up with a policy. So after that, I was in the nonprofit space for about a year and a half. Unfortunately, as a millennial, got hit by the Great Recession. I was sitting at home one day, and I decided to go volunteer for a Senate race in Massachusetts, Martha Coakley, which did not end the way I wanted it to, but I had become an organizer. So I did campaigns for a few years. And the great thing about that when you're young is you get to travel the nation a little bit. So I did Martha Coakley's race. I did Ron Klein down in Florida for, from April to November. See a different part of the country, live in a different part of the country you never live, meet new people, get a different sense of what other parts of the country are like. Got a lot of great organizing experience, got a lot of great lessons on that campaign as well. Did campaigns for a couple of years back up in New England, ran state senate races, state house races, small city council race. So I got the management experience a little bit there. And back when you could actually afford to live on, say, $1,500 a month, a little dicey, but so I did the campaign side, and made a lot of great connections that way, met a lot of good people in New England, especially in Massachusetts. And I was lucky enough to then work for Congressman Keating down in Cape Cod for 6 years. And again, worked in his Hyannis office, his Cape Cod office, and again, learned so many great things about the intersection of local policy and federal policy, right? Where and this is no disrespect to Washington, D.C. people. The Washington, D.C. people have to worry about what's going on in Washington, D.C. When you're local, you have to worry about what's going on in our local municipalities and how can we elevate that to the next level for our member. And Bill Keating is amazing, by the way, at doing local things. He understands the game. He was a former state rep and state senator, so he understands that I got to deal with these local issues to make sure to make sure we're doing what we need to do, basically. Got a lot, got involved in housing issues. Got, again, you learn a lot in these, right? You learn the intersections of housing, energy, environment, beach erosion, ocean policy, ocean acidification, and then how does that affect and all that.
The
Fishing,
things that other people don't have to think about, right? They don't have to worry about where the beach is because you are, because the
right?
other people are. I
Exactly.
want to stop for a second and go back to
Oops,
something
sorry.
you're saying. You said you're a millennial, and then
Yeah.
you also talked about these stints, these 6-8 month stints on
Yes.
campaign, like down in Florida, and I think it's there's a criticism of millennials out there that says like you don't know how to work hard, or you just want the cushy jobs, and I'm not subscribing to that, but I think that's out there. Like, can you talk about what that's like being on a campaign, right? You show up to a new place. You're Florida, right? You're from Northeast. You show up in Florida.
Yep.
You're probably sleeping on a couch for a few nights until you figure out your situation. You're probably
Yep.
working until 2 a.m. some nights. You're doing things that your college educated self might think that, like, why the heck am I doing this? It should be somebody else's job because, like, I'm smarter than this. Like, talk about those experiences and why it's worthwhile doing that.
Oh, absolutely. So, especially when you're young, those 6 to 8 month stints are great if you have the right campaign environment. I will say, I was on 2 losing campaigns to start, but one was a big Senate race. One was a Senate race where you meet you meet all these people, and you're creating this sense of kinship, right? For lack of a better term, right? You're spending, to your point, I was in the Shraff Center in Charlestown, and it was spending 8 hours a day with people, making phone calls, and this high pressure cooker situation, especially towards the end. But it creates these bonds where you're like, hey, do you remember? Or hey, we did this together and all that. And because everyone was working so hard too, you kept these connections going, and you make these connections and people remember the hard work you did. And it was the same thing when I did Ron Klein's campaign. I was down there in April. I was probably the fourth or fifth staff member, just start, as an organizer who went down there. And it was the same thing. I was living with 2 people on the campaign. You're working these brutal hours, as you point out, right? 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. The summer in Florida is not exactly easy, right? But like, you create this kinship and you create this bond, and it's so, again, in the right atmosphere, it's something that you last forever. I still text my people from Ron Klein's campaign all the time. How you doing? That's how I also met Ron's chief of staff, and he's been very helpful to me as time has gone on as well. So the 6 to 8 month stints, as we talk about more broadly with the millennials, and I've even told some younger people this, is that you are allowed to take risk when you are younger, right? So when you are young, taking that risk is fine because you have less. I don't want to say less to lose, but that no risk without reward, right? The higher the risk, the higher reward. Ultimately, just make sure it's a calculated risk, obviously, but that you can do these things when you don't have an apartment, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have a family, and when you have the energy to do it. Part of the reason I have moved on into sort of more of the consulting side is that I can't pull 80-hour weeks anymore. I can't be up until 2 in the morning. And trust me, I loved being up until 2 in the morning. I loved, again, the camaraderie that comes with it, and that sort of fun tiredness. And Adam, I'm sure you understand that as well,
Absolutely.
right? There's a almost fun drain in that. But as you get older too, you're like, I can't do this every night. So I'd also say too, just in general, as we talk about research, right, that you know it's hard to find jobs that are going to keep you on for 10 years and constantly give you raises right, like. And I think the one good side about politics is that there are so many facets of it. There is the campaign side, there's the public policy side, there's the government relations side, there's the regulatory side, there is the municipal side, the state side, the federal side, all of that. So when you're young, doing those stints gets you an idea of what you like, what you don't like, and it also allows you to send a message to, if as well, like, I don't like this, the way this is being done, I don't necessarily like how I'm being talked to, then you can sort of say, great, on to my next thing. So um and I think it's just it's a fun time, right, to sort of constantly experience new things ultimately. So
So
yeah.
how did you make that jump from working for the congressman to, working for yourself, basically?
Couple things I did. I went to UMass Boston at night, got my master's degree, so I have an MPA from UMass Boston, where I wrote about housing issues. Um, and I think that element was critical in this sense. Not that the MPA gives you credibility, but I wasn't down in DC. I wasn't necessarily doing the policy research, so the MPA helped me get my, like, here's how to critically look at the government. Here's how to critically look at structures. Here's how to do research and stuff like that. Not that you don't not know how to do that at college, but it's a good way to help you narrow down your frameworks. That's number one.
Sure.
I then spent a couple years after Congressman Keating's office. I did another nonprofit. I worked part-time for a business up in North Andover. And you know, taking all those experiences, I just sort of said, why don't I just try this out on my own for a little bit? I My theory of change at the time anyway was that there was nonprofits that needed, medium to small nonprofits who need the public affairs help, right? That filing one piece of legislation could help you fundraise a lot of money if you know what to do, right? That you can go, you get a state rep here, you get a piece of legislation filed at Beacon Hill, and then you can then go to your donors and say, look, I'm making change, I'm making the moves I need to make, I need funding to help me do that. And it gets you a nice statement, you can get a little press off of it.
Yeah.
And then my other thing that I really do, and anyone who's listening, hopefully, I encourage people who come from underrepresented communities, whether that's being a woman, being a person of color, whatever, take your pick, that to run for office. And the reason I say that, and this was during COVID, I helped a woman of color run for school board in a small town here in Massachusetts, and just the the system can be very fearful if you don't know it, but if you do know how to run for office, and you do know what to look for, it becomes a lot easier for people, and you realize that some people just haven't been engaged in that, or they haven't been, no one's told them the tricks that maybe other communities have been told.
Okay.
And she won, so she is now on the school board. And I think that's a critical step, that if we want a fully represented democracy, the communities have to reflect who represents them. Massachusetts population of color is growing very rapidly. Boston's a majority minority city. A few of the suburbs, or a few of the cities that surround Boston, are as well, but that's also spreading into the spreading's not quite the word I want to use there, but it's the demographics are shifting in this state and across the nation, and you can either, we can resist that, or we can sort of embrace that as, this is great, let's look to the new generation of leadership.
Sure. So can you bring up an instance or two, or talk about how you use research, how you use polling, focus groups, any kind of formalized research in your political work or public affairs work? Any kind of cool examples of that?
Sure. I have a lot, but for the campaign work, even just getting campaign data, so even on the local level, I go, Massachusetts has a website for the Secretary of State's office. It gives you the results of a campaign. It goes precinct by precinct. And being able to create models, even using simple statistics like mean, average, high, low, is incredibly useful, right? Because you get, and fun for me to sort of construct these things as well, right? So you get an Excel from the Secretary of State's website. You go, oh, look at this, precinct 5 in Boston shows up more than precinct 6, or here's these group of precincts that always show up. Here's the next group, and here's the don't bother category, right? And that helps you and your candidate craft a better campaign, right? Instead of sort of going on instinct, we know, for instance, that, hey, this group is where the Democrats vote the most. This precinct has more Republicans, so in a Democratic primary, it might not be worth it to go into here. Also knowing, even too, like being able to layer on, because no campaigns are alike, but you can use campaigns to sub in for, like, hey, if this is a contentious partisan campaign, here's who voted for, we'll use Massachusetts, here's who voted for Charlie Baker, here's who voted for Martha Coakley, here's who voted for Maura Healey, here's who voted for you, here's who voted for your opponent, right? And then you can create, you don't need fancy statistical modeling. You just need to be able to be like, okay, this is the average, this is who, and then we just rank it 1 through 7, who shows up the most, who doesn't. So that's, sort of the statistical side of it. Think tanks are good. You just got to make sure, they're partisan lean. So in the nonprofit space, going and finding out what people are saying about, when I did education policy at, knowing that if you pick from the ACLU, you just got to realize it has a very, left-ish leaning bias, right? So knowing that, but you can pick the arguments that are sound, right? You don't have to necessarily buy into the framework. You can say, listen, this says this. To that extent, if you are running campaigns, by the way, anyone who's listening to me right now, make sure you just have a subscription to your local newspaper. So I have a subscription to the Boston Globe. You can pull a lot of data from there too. And then, at UMass Boston, I always talk about the regression model. And again, it's not necessarily knowing all the math behind it, but it is knowing how to read it, right? So you know how to read margin of error. You know what that means. You know what your p-scores mean and all that. Don't quiz me on it. But I think we live in an interesting world, right? Sorry. One other thing, from the public policy standpoint.
Yeah.
The government posts legislation, especially on the federal government, is a dearth of information, right? So if someone posts legislation, the legislation is on congress.gov. You can go through it and you can give a reasonable, if you can read, you can give a reasonable interpretation of what the federal government's trying to do. So that's number one. But also even the census is great for, all that statistical data about your community and all that. And where that comes in, by the way, when you're doing public policy and campaigns, is, oh, hey, this might be more of a Spanish-speaking community. Let's make sure we get some, Spanish-speaking ads into this community. Let's make sure we get some, let's make sure we get the alternate language. Let's make sure we get, we understand that this, there might be more construction going on here because there's more homes going up here. That sort of thing.
Can you? I always love to give the opportunity to give like a shout out to like that one mentor, that one person that was like super pivotal in your career, or just in life in general, that you credit with something big, something significant in your life. Is there someone like that you can call out?
Well, first I have to call out my shout out to my sister Suzanne Morse, who again set me on this path, and has been helpful and always just sort of helping me find people. But if we're gonna take the non-family route, and I already mentioned him, but I think it's worth mentioning again, is Governor Dukakis. He was so good at Northeastern and at UCLA when he made sure that you at least came to his office hours, he sat down, he chatted with you, he talked about your project with you. He gave you names. He gave you, hey, you should talk to this person. You should talk to, you should talk to, you should talk to the transportation secretary. Here's their number and email, right? Like that sort of thing. He had a very sort of giving, that I try to reflect forward, right? And I think that's something to focus on when you're doing public policy work, is that we, Republican, Democrat, Green, Libertarian, whatever, is that we should be, pay it forward and share. And I think that creates the sort of most inclusive government, and it creates more understanding, right? Ultimately, that, here's the problem as I see it. Well, no, I see the problem this way. And then you come together and you create policy ultimately. And he gave you different ways to think about it. He gave you casework to look at and read and sort of help you understand where something might have worked, where something went wrong, those sorts of things. So, he's wonderful. I think he's turned 90 this year. I'm not 100% sure, but if you go on the Boston Globe, occasionally you find an article of him. He still takes the T, to Brookline every day. So, he's just one of the nicest people you're ever going to meet, and really committed to everyone succeeding. And that's something that I always try, whether it's giving advice, helping someone on the path, is that I want everyone to succeed as much as possible.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk about tools. Like I'm a big fan of understanding workflow and tech stack. So you're a one man shop, or you have some other staff?
So I am by myself. It's just me, myself, and I. I do, I subcontract occasionally, or I work with occasionally. I work with other people, and um, and that creates a useful sort of, hey, we can't do this. Okay, well then I'll just siphon it off. I'll just take this as Morse policy consultant, and you guys don't have to, take something like that. But yeah, so just me, myself, and I for the moment.
And what do you use? Like, what's like the software you couldn't live without? Are you a Microsoft or a Google guy? Are you what when you wake up in the morning? What do you have to look at news wise and app wise?
Yeah, so I am Google and Microsoft all the way. So to all people out there, and this is true in Outlook too, but Google Calendar is your best friend in a lot of ways, because you can it's so easy and so customizable. And it's just easy to say, hey, here's here are my meetings this week. Let me share my calendar with you so you know what meetings I have. I can set my to-do lists so people know where I have holds and all of that. So any calendar software that is easily shareable, which Google tends to be, is just super critical, because it also makes sure that people respect your boundaries as well. It's like, hey, I have blocked off this time for this. Please, please respect it. I'm a Droid user. I'll got my I am Google. I know I'm probably gonna lose some people on the podcast, but yeah. So yeah, I'm G Suite. Um, I'm G Suite. I know how to use Discord. I'm on Discord. I have and its sister. Oh no, it's not Slack, right? Slack and Discord are very similar in that, I don't. If someone uses Slack, I use it too. I think the interesting thing is that you have to be somewhat adaptable in these positions, right? Because I still use Microsoft products, right? I still use Microsoft 365, right? Because you still have people like, I only know how to use Word, I only know how to use Excel and all that. So, where Google does provide a lot of that, like 99% of the replicability.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it right the first time. But yeah, so Google and Microsoft are my go-to. I'm still, and I'm kind of old school like that. Like I've tried using like to-do lists things, and I've tried, some of those workflow things, and they don't necessarily work for me, because you have to attach it, and you have to attach it to your Gmail account and all that. So I just try to use the calendar as much as possible, and then write myself a to-do list every week as well. Um, so, but I know that the
So
people. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
it, no, go ahead. No, Keith, finish that thought.
I was gonna say it's an interesting thing, right? That, and I don't know much about this, but I've talked to people about it too. Like, sometimes the problem with the to-do list is that if you have executive dysfunction too. Like, I want to do the list, I want to do the things on my list, but my brain won't allow me to do it. So, like, I just also try to be like, okay, I know what I have to do this week, and I know I've set aside the time, but don't be so inflexible that, like, if my brain's not going there, slot into something else, and then get it done in another part of your schedule. So
Yeah. All right. So you wake up in the morning. What do you have to look at? What's the first three apps? What's the first three things that you have to
Gmail,
look at?
Gmail to make sure there's no emergencies and all of that. I'm on Instagram, so I see if there's again any big news on Instagram. I'm trying to decouple myself from greater social media. No offense to the social, because I still need to know it. And then so it's Gmail, and then Instagram, and then my Alexa goes off to WBUR every morning, so I get the local and international news. And I don't know if that counts as an app. Does Alexa count as an app? Sure, why not? Yeah. And then and then of course my Keurig coffee maker, so I can function for the rest of the day. um
Fantastic.
And so, and then
Uh,
you check. I check Boston. I check the Boston Globe. I check CNN. Just to make sure there's nothing I'm missing. Because I am so locally focused for the most part, it's also stuff like the Master List, or Politico Massachusetts, which is very hyper local. Here's what's going on in Beacon Hill. Here's what's going around the Commonwealth.
Very cool. Okay, anything we missed? Anything you should? Well, let's do it this way. Is there some sort of like mantra, some sort of like words to live by that you either think to yourself all the time, or you tell other people that is just super important and concise?
I think, there's this great quote from Scrubs, and it always sticks in my mind. I don't know if you ever watched Scrubs, but it's Dr.
Yeah.
Cox, and he says to JD, "The only person you have to answer to yourself at the end of the day is you." And I do really take that to heart, right? You're gonna hear it from everyone, except for my very supportive family, my wife and my 2 kids. Love them; they're very supportive. Everyone's gonna have an opinion. Did you try your best? And did you do the things that you think you were supposed to do? And if that's the case, then great. And just try to improve on the next time. So yeah, the only person that ultimately you answer to is you. And you gotta, for what that is worth, is that it helps you shut out some of the negative things that come into your mind. Yeah.
I think you're definitely right. We gotta answer to ourselves, and if we're not true to that, it becomes problematic.
Right. And listen, you can't, you have your KPIs, you have and those are tools. We have to remember that those are tools ultimately to get you where you're going, but there's so many things that are outside of your control, so that's why the accountability to yourself is important. Ultimately, you can't, as someone who's done elections, the things you can't control are the things you can't control, and it's not your fault when if everything doesn't fall the right way.
True. Very cool. Well, thanks for joining. I really appreciate
Thank
it. I
you.
think you've got a really interesting story, and
Oh, thank you.
your trajectory is impressive to get to where you are and get to determine your own future after having worked so hard. So kind of fun to
Thank
hear
you.
that story.
Well, I appreciate it, Adam, and I thank you for finding me and letting me tell my story.
Very cool. All right. Thanks very much, Anthony Morse. Until next time.
This has been Insights to Communicate with Adam Probalski, president of the woman and Latina-owned market and opinion research firm, Probalski Research.